Everyone, welcome to meeting number 62 of the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to House Order of June 23rd, 2022. Members are attending in person in the room as well as remotely using the Zoom application. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of the members and witnesses. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, do click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please do mute yourselves when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom is that at the bottom of your screen, and you have a choice of either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. Now, for all the members, I ask for your indulgence. This morning, I was unable to make the flight for reasons beyond my control. But today, pursuant to Standing Order 81-4, the committee commences its consideration of the main estimates 2023-2024. Votes 1, 5, 10, 15, 20, and L30 under Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade, and Development, vote 1 under International Development Research Center, and vote 1 under International Joint Commission, Canadian section, referred to the committee on Wednesday, February 15th, 2023. Now it's my pleasure to welcome to the committee today the Honorable Harjit Sajjan, the Minister of International Development. Moreover, welcome also should be extended to his officials who will be supporting him today in consideration of the main estimates 2023-2024. We have from the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, several officials. First, we have Mr. Christopher McClellan, the Deputy Minister, International Development. We also have Anique Houlette, Assistant Deputy Minister and Chief Financial Officer. We have Peter McDougall, Assistant Deputy Minister, Global Issues and Development. We have with us Ms. Patricia Pina, Assistant Deputy Minister, Partnerships for Development Innovation. We have Ms. Annie Boyer, Director General and Deputy Chief Financial Officer, Financial Planning and Management. And we also have with us Mr. Andrew Smith, the Director General, International Assistance Policy. Now, Minister Sajjan, thank you for once again appearing before our committee today. You will be provided a maximum of 5 minutes for your remarks, after which we will open it to the members for questions. Minister Sajjan, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the members of the committee. I'm glad to be here today to discuss Canada's leadership in international assistance. As members know, the world is facing a rising tide of instability. The lingering effects of the pandemic's disruption of global supply chains, Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine, the multidimensional humanitarian crisis in Haiti, and also the devastating outbreak of violence in Sudan. More frequent and extreme weather events are also resulting as a result of climate change, the Taliban's aggressive moves against women and girls, restrictions on reproductive rights in Poland, the U.S., and other countries, and a backlash against gender equality across the world. These are immense global challenges, and Canada has played and will continue to play an important role in rising to meet these needs. Now, against this backdrop, I'm proud to report that Canada continues to meet and even exceed its goals for international development assistance under the Feminist International Assistance Policy. In 2021-22, nearly all 99% of Canada's bilateral international development assistance either targeted or integrated gender equality, meeting and then exceeding our target of 95% by 2022. We continue to address the root causes of poverty and inequality by focusing on those most likely to be left behind and empowering women and girls in all their diversity. We're also committed to constantly improving the quality and effectiveness of our international assistance. These achievements have not gone unnoticed. Canada was one of the first countries in the world to put a feminist international assistance policy in place, and others are now following suit. For the fourth year in a row, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development acknowledged us as the top bilateral donor for gender equality. Now, looking forward, Canada's leadership is more consequential and needed more than ever before. So, for example, Canada is delivering on its commitment under the Paris Agreement to keep the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal within reach. Our global climate investments are expected to prevent or reduce more than 228 megatons of greenhouse gas emissions, or take Canada's support to the Global Environment Facility. As the seventh largest donor, our support is helping more than 8 million people adapt to climate change and protect almost 99 million hectares of marine biodiversity. But we know that funding alone is not enough to address the uneven impacts of climate change. And that's why we continue to advocate for the resilience and adaptation of developing countries through our engagement in both the Green Climate Fund and climate investment funds. And at the same time, we continue to work with like-minded partners, including multilateral organizations, to phase out coal and promote investments in clean energy. And we continue to advocate internationally for small island developing states and least developed countries that contribute the least to climate change, yet are most vulnerable to its impacts. The most vulnerable countries today are at the front line of some of the most challenging crises of our time, including but not limited to climate change. And as we speak, in 2023, over 346 million people are in need of humanitarian assistance. More than 100 million people are forcibly displaced, and over 345 million people are predicted to be food insecure. Canada continues to be a leader in addressing humanitarian needs that rise year on year. And in 2022, we were the fifth largest humanitarian donor, providing more than $1 billion in humanitarian assistance. Last year, we allocated over $400 million in humanitarian assistance to respond to needs in sub-Saharan Africa, $227 million to respond to needs in Ukraine, and over $143 million to Afghanistan and the region. We also allocated nearly $650 million for humanitarian food and nutrition assistance in response to the growing global food crisis. Our assistance helped the World Food Program to reach a record 158 million people who are food insecure in 2022, an impressive 27% increase from 2021. We also contributed to providing humanitarian assistance and protection to more than 100 million refugees and other forcibly displaced persons through UNHCR in 2022. In line with FAAE, Canada continues to be a strong advocate for gender-responsive humanitarian action, and Canada also remains committed to the triple nexus approach that integrates humanitarian development and peace and security actions to more effectively respond and ultimately prevent conflict. Because that is what good development assistance does. It goes hand in hand with peace and stabilization actions. Global Affairs Canada is constantly working to improve the quality and effectiveness of Canada's international assistance. While the Auditor General's recent report affirms the urgent need for Canada's feminine international assistance policy, it also calls for improved systems to capture and report its results and to better integrate gender equality, human rights, and intersectional considerations into our projects to ensure that we are reaching the poorest and most vulnerable. Now, through the ongoing Grants and Contributions Transformation Initiative, Global Affairs Canada is also finding new ways of working that are faster, more transparent, and more flexible. This will further enhance Canada's capacity to both report on and deliver sustainable results that make a positive change in people's lives. Meaningful climate action and humanitarian assistance go hand in hand with gender equality and also human rights to build a more just and more prosperous world for all of us. And that is why we are making the most of the transformative potential of Canada's feminist approach to international assistance to tackle the root causes of inequality and poverty, to transform the lives of the most in need around the globe. Thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much for your opening remarks, Minister. Now I'll open the floor to questions by the members. Our first member is Mr. Jennis. Mr. Jennis, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I want to just start today by honoring Kyle Porter and Cole Zelenko, two Canadians heroes who died during fighting in Bakhmut after joining Ukraine's International Legion. Those who knew them must be feeling a lot of pain right now, but also a lot of pride in the courage that these young men demonstrated in this important fight. Minister, thank you for being here to take our questions. During the fall of Afghanistan, a Trudeau-appointed senator issued fake Canadian travel documents. This is obviously extremely serious. Emails were sent to you about this at the time, but you said that you didn't read those emails. As Minister of International Development today, do you check your emails, and would you say you read all of them?
Well, Mr. Chair, at the previous committee, I took the time to answer those questions. And Mr. Chair, if you want me to answer questions on emails or the mains, I'd leave it to you.
I control the time, and I'd like you to answer the question about your current activities as Minister of International Development. Do you check your emails today? Do you read the emails you receive?
I do read emails.
All of them?
I can assure you, if you're asking, Mr. Chair, if you want me to answer the question and give me the opportunity to answer it, we were in a very intense time.
I'm just asking, do you check your emails
Mr.
now?
Chair, if you want me to answer the question,
point of order.
and let me answer the question, I'm happy to do so, because if you want a little soundbite, you can try to get it.
No, I'm just asking now, as Minister for International Development, do you check your emails?
Committee, because I'm happy to answer these questions, but give me the opportunity.
I understand we
to
have
fully.
a point of order. Yes, if we could proceed with the point of order.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to clarify on relevance of the topic that we're talking about this morning, please.
Yes, if I could ask the members to keep it relevant to the main estimates, which is the reason why the minister is with us today.
Chair, just on the
Mr.
same point,
Janice?
I was asking the minister if, in his current role as Minister for International Development, if he checks all of his emails and reads them. It's hard to argue that that's not relevant to his current activities. So if
Fair enough.
Thank you.
We will now turn to the minister.
Thank you. Go ahead, Minister, please.
Yes, I do check my emails.
Thank you. What was the precise period during which you did not check your emails?
It's not during this, when there is intense times, when during defense, when we're busy with extreme operations. Yes, I have to prioritize my time on the issues at hand, and that time, if there's many events, my emails go to a lot lower priority.
Okay. During those intense times, do you have staff members who review your emails for you that can bring important items to your attention, or do they just go unchecked?
Well, great question. Normally I would, but at that time I had very limited staff.
Okay, but today, if it's an intense time, I mean, we're dealing with an evacuation situation in Sudan. There's other, I would think that international development is a very intense portfolio as well. Do you have staff who check your personal email when you're not able to, that can bring important items to your attention?
Yes, I have staff to check my work email in my current portfolio.
Okay, and bring important items to your attention, presumably?
Yes.
Okay. Do you use an alternative email during those times for high priority items?
I do not.
Okay. It's a bit of a challenge in that, during these intense times, people obviously need to get a hold of you as minister. Senator McPhedran appears to believe that you were aware of what's going on. You say you weren't. Is there a reason why she would believe that? Did you have other conversations with her other than those on email?
So, Mr. Chair, if you want to keep going down this path, if you allow me to explain, during the evacuation from Kabul, the work that was required of me during that time with limited staff, keep in mind that at times I'm actually in an area where I'm actually not even close to my phones because it's classified. Most of the work that we do, most of the reporting and the systems that we have to have in place.
Yeah. That wasn't my question, though, Minister, right? My question was, Senator McPhedran's under the impression you were aware of these fake documents that were distributed.
And as I told you, I get emails,
you say you were not aware. Why would she have that impression?
I get on emails all the time. Doesn't mean that I see all of them.
And okay.
At the same time,
how many staff do you have in your ministerial office right now?
Well, if you want to, for example, I think it's...
Sorry, how many staff do you have in your ministerial office right now?
Mr. Chair, if you want me to answer the question, because at the same time...
I'd like you to answer the question I'm asking. How many staff do you have in your ministerial office right now?
If I could just allow, if the members would allow the witness to answer the question. Minister, the floor is yours.
not gonna
Again,
allow-
Chair, this is my time. My question is how many ministerial staff do you have right now?
Because I'm not going to allow you at the same time to put me into a position. I need to provide the full context of where you're trying to.
Chair, could you ask the minister to
So,
come to order, please? He
no.
has an obligation to answer the questions,
I
not
am
just
trying to
to
answer
decide
the
what
question.
he will or won't allow.
I will allow the minister to answer the question in context as part of his response. Minister, the floor is yours.
The question is, how many staff do you have in your ministerial office,
I
Minister?
have a number of staff in my ministerial staff.
What's
to
the
answer.
number?
I can't remember off the top of my
Is
head.
it
but-
more or less than you had when you were Minister of Defense?
Well, you can't. If I can give me the context, explain. It's a little bit less.
Right.
However, at that time, no, I did not have staff. I had one chief of staff at that time with minimal staff at that time.
Okay, so the context was you had only one member of staff during that crisis, so you weren't checking your
So
emails.
I didn't
you
have
didn't
my
have someone
normal
else to
staff
check your
to normally
emails.
do for that would assist me
Yeah,
in
yeah.
my normal day to day at that time.
Okay.
During that time.
In terms of GAC, so what we have heard is that your chief of staff at the time, George Young, received a template from someone at GAC
Point of order.
that was then used for producing those illegal documents.
Yes.
Who is the person
1
at
second,
GAC
please.
who?
There's a point of order, Mr. Jennis. Yes, Ms. Vanderbilt.
Now I believe that my colleague is going into things that don't have to do with the main estimates, and also I believe he's badgering the witness.
On that point, I was asking actually for the name of a GAC employee
Excuse me,
who provided
Mr.
those
Jennis.
documents.
Mr. Jennis, you do recall that the chair has to permit you to speak. I just want to once again emphasize to all members to please keep their questions relevant. Thank you. Mr. Jennis, you have the floor for another 25 seconds.
Thank you, Minister. Who was that GAC employee who provided those documents?
Sorry, please. Can you answer the question? I'm not fully understanding it.
Who was the GAC employee who provided to your chief of staff the template that was used for producing these fake documents?
Sorry. First of all, wasn't aware. I wasn't tracking the actual process. Who was the process for the facilitation letters?
You must have followed up on this information more recently, have you not, Chair?
I'm afraid, Mr. Jennis, you're out of time, sir.
Thank you, Chair.
We will now go to the next member. We will go to MP Zuberi. You have 6 minutes, MP Zuberi.
Thank you, Minister, for being here today, and to your officials and to your entire department for the excellent work you are doing to help Canada to give back to the rest of the world, which is actually an important obligation for us as a G7 nation. We need to give back to the world, and I want to sincerely thank you and your team for doing that. I know that you've been quite active in the current Parliament in the last year or so, visiting different parts of the world to ensure that our development assistance has been well delivered. And before I get into question, I do want to salute you for your work that you've done in Bangladesh to deal with refugee education, in Pakistan to address climate change, when you visit the Philippines and Senegal, again, to ensure that we are giving back to the world. That's extremely important work. You touched upon climate change, and your visit to Pakistan also addressed the issue of climate change. Can you share with us and help us understand how climate change will become an increasingly important issue, will impact communities and millions of people in the world, in the global south, and what we are doing to mitigate climate change and help people adapt to it?
No, thanks very much for the question. Sadly, I would say that the climate change is already impacting and has been impacting the developing world quite extensively. The most recent examples of this has been the floods in Pakistan and disasters, typhoons in the Philippines, and as you know, many places in Africa. Canada, through its climate adaptation funding and most recently biodiversity funding, are doing our part to help nations who had very little impact in creating the crisis, but actually deal with the impacts of it. So from creating, not only responding directly to the disasters, but also looking at how we can put in early warning systems, but also make sure that we can provide humanitarian support, and then ultimately trying to mitigate some of those disasters. Some of these programs had a very good effect in some parts of the world. Sadly, some of these disasters are hitting other areas that we hadn't anticipated, but now we will, through our funding, we will look at opportunities how we can protect, try to protect and save people's lives, but also the livelihood. For example, agricultural fields are completely being flooded in some areas. In other parts of the country, it's because of drought. So we are taking measures on how do we deal with this, because ultimately what we're trying to do is deal with the impacts on food security as well.
So you touched upon food security. What are we doing to help shore up food security? We are one of the key funders of the World Food Program, an amazing UN agency that is helping to ensure that people have basic nutrition so they can continue on with their lives and develop fully as global citizens. What are we doing to help shore up food security on the global stage?
Food security is a multi-dimensional approach. One is where there's a need, you have to provide direct humanitarian support. Something that we have been doing and having to increase our support. In fact, actually last year, we had to increase support in an off-cycle budget request, which the Prime Minister announced $250 million. Some of the funding went to Ukraine, but majority of it was to the global south. What we're trying to do now is increase our support on building capacity within nations. Working with nations, especially in Africa, to look at their own country plans, look at what their vision is. How do we support them? Increase, and I also want to emphasize, this is not just about increasing more agricultural food products or within the or in the blue economy. This is about creating food systems. Where do you grow the food? The storage is a key component. 30% right now of the food is lost because of lack of storage or transportation. Then through this is how do we create a sustainable jobs throughout this. So looking at the entire food systems, looking at other barriers and what we can do. Sometimes there's trade barriers. Now, how do we support nations on trade? So it's a multifaceted approach that we're taking, but ultimately what we want to do is look at building capacity. This has worked well in other parts of the world, especially in the Pacific in previous decades, something that now we're emphasizing in other parts of the world.
Certainly, and I recently participated in a really great meeting with the World Food Program. They had a representative from the Middle East, North Africa, Turkey, and Palestine, and they helped us to understand the important work that's being done to help people be food secure, so we can, as a way to help with global peace and stability. Which you alluded to in your remarks earlier, how international development actually helps with global peace and security, helps mitigate conflict. Do you want to elaborate a bit upon that?
Please, thank you. And this is something I think all of us should be emphasizing even more. When we look at conflict, you can usually find a root cause that started the ripple effect or allowed nefarious groups to start recruit them into organizations, usually because of hunger. So because of the hunger crisis right now, I've been deeply concerned about potential crises, whether it's the food protest that took place in Syria that led to the rise of Daesh within the region, or other issues like this, other parts of the world. So when you make people's lives better, when food is there, and you look after their health, it insulates them from the factors that kind of lead to instability.
Thank you, and that's...
Thank you very much. We will now go to the next member, MP Bergeron. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister, for joining us today. In your letter for the Prime Minister of Canada, you set out as an objective to increase international development aid for Canada by 2030.
Yes, if I could ask Madam Clerk. Apologies for that, Mr. Bergeron. Is everything okay, Madam Clerk? If I could ask the clerk if everything is in.
Can you hear the interpreter?
Hello.
Minister? Madam Clerk, can you hear the interpreter now? Well, all is well then. Minister, this is what I like to call the interpretation pause. So, in the Prime Minister's letter to you, ask you to set an increase to international development aid by 2030 in order to reach the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which are at 0.7% of the GDP. There was an increase of 15% in the last estimates. In a report by Radio Canada, you stated that money is not everything. That it's not only enough to announce money, but one has to ensure that you have the correct programs in place to achieve the results that you're looking to put in place. My question is simple. Minister, you do believe that that objective of 0.7% of the domestic GDP must be an objective that needs to be reached, something that we should aim for, and that you still intend to ensure that you can achieve this objective?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm here to assure Mr. Chair, everyone in this committee, that our government is committed to increasing our international development assistance, something that we announced in their throne speech, and also most recently in this budget. We know the importance of the work that we do, and we will continue to, within the years to come, look at a plan to increase international development.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre. Vous avez pris beaucoup.
Thank you, Minister. In your preliminary remarks, you spoke a great deal about the food crisis. There were $250 million that had been allocated to support Canada's response to the nutritional and food crisis in the world by stressing sub-Saharan Africa, and that ended on March 31st, 2023. So how do you reconciliate the importance that you seem to place on the fight against food insecurity and nutrition insecurity, and the fact that the budgets are being cut, that is, those allocated to fighting food issues, specifically given the current context with the supply issues that derive out of the Ukraine war?
Mr. Chair, Canada will always step up when at times of crisis. And if you recall, the $250 million was not actually in the original budget. That was requested because the need that was there to making sure that we kind of get people through this year. We do have funding that we provide for food security within our current budget. We also are working on a wider plan on how we can do our part to increase capacity within many nations. But that plan is still being worked on. Once we have that, this is something that again we will bring through cabinet for greater work, and that's what it is. Money is important, and we are our government is committed. But we also need to make sure that the money has a plan to actually meet the results that we want. Some of the work is not just about increasing food capacity or giving food. What we want to do is look at some of the research. For example, some of the research that is done in Nairobi that we fund. A lot of the food and the beans that are being developed there are more nutritious. And I'm always reminded by my nutrition colleagues is don't just focus on food. It has to be nutritious food. So sadly, in some places where in a refugee camp that I visited, in Kakuma refugee camp, it was cut to one meal a day. And at least, as sad as that is, at least the food that they were cooking was more nutritious. But given the food security crisis, as the former head of the World Food Program has said, at times they're taking food from the starving to give to the hungry. And this is why we're focused on this issue.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre. Nous serons très...
Thank you, Minister. We look forward to hearing the new announcements to that effect. I would like to share a concern that I have previously shared with my colleagues as part of our contacts with other countries, Western countries, more specifically regarding the Ukraine conflict. One thing that we have noticed worldwide is that an important portion of international assistance, that is, budgets allocated to the international assistance provided by a number of Western countries, have been set aside to provide, of course, necessary aid to Ukraine. However, by that very token, the southern countries are deprived of part of the funds that normally would have been destined for them. We already have a sense that for the southern countries, that the war in Ukraine is a dispute between wealthy countries. We've seen that at the United Nations as well. We've seen that countries like Canada have moved away from their commitments to continents like Africa in favor of countries like Russia, allowing Russia and China to set up shop there with the results we're familiar with, and that obviously can be seen in the results of the vote in the UN regarding the war in Ukraine. Would it, that rather than perverting or diverting part of these sums that normally would be allocated to the southern countries and now are going to the Ukraine, would it not be better to simply boost the development assistance funds and to allow the southern countries to obtain more monies?
I'm afraid we're out of time. If I could ask the minister to provide a very brief response to Mr. Bergeron's question.
Yes, it is very important. I think we can all agree that we support Ukraine at this time. However, sadly, other countries have. Canada has not reduced our support to the Global South. In fact, actually, the $250 million that I talked about was actually more support. So we actually increased our food security support. I'm happy to talk to you about offline if you'd like on this.
Thank you. We next go to MP McPherson. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much to the witnesses. Thank you, Minister, for being here with us today. Minister, as you know, I spent my career prior to politics in the international development sector, so I have many questions for you, so forgive me if I interrupt you. But I have to start by saying I find some of your words don't actually match the actions of this government. You know, you talk about the need for peace and security. The government has promised 600 peacekeepers. We have 60, I believe, in the field right now. You know, you went to Qatar. You've not spoken out about Saudi Arabia taking weapons and using them against innocent civilians. So I do worry about that. And then, of course, you talk about the need for increased international development, but we saw in the budget a 15% cut to ODA. You know, at a time when we have a climate crisis and people around the world are suffering disproportionately, a time where we have a hunger crisis, a time where conflict is causing massive challenges, when we have a feminist international assistance policy, and this country, even though we are already 16 out of 30 of donor countries, even though we are already so far below what Pearson wanted us to be at, the ambitions that Canadians want for this country, we cut international development by 15%. You know, your job as the International Development Minister is to advocate for international development, to make sure that the caucus understands why international development is so important. What have you been doing to do that? How have you been advocating for the sector when what we see right now is a 15% cut to ODA?
So first, Mr. Chair, and to the members of the committee, I would like to explain. When the actual baseline of our budget has been systematically increasing, but when crises do come up, Canada does need to step up as well. So when it came to the COVID crisis, just like we had to increase funding inside Canada, we've also increased our COVID support internationally as well. Plus with the Ukraine crisis. But because of those additions, but if you were to take those two funding streams out, that our baseline funding for international development has steadily increased. And we will continue to.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but you can't take those out. That's like saying if you take out the hunger crisis, that doesn't count. You can't take that out. That's the reality of the world that we're living in. And we are not done with COVID in many parts of the world, as I'm sure you know. The hunger crisis is escalating. It is not reducing. The conflict in Ukraine may not be over for a decade. I mean, goodness knows, I certainly hope it is over very quickly for the people of Ukraine, and I certainly hope we do everything we can for the people of Ukraine. But realistically, to say, don't worry, it would have been the same if these things hadn't happened, it doesn't matter. They did happen. This is the reality of the world. We do have a 15% cut from last year, and this is at a time when we have increasing needs. Canada is not there.
So can I also explain, Mr. Chair, if you give me the opportunity, which is the numbers that are being evaluated is at the end of the year. Currently, the budget that we're asking is now at the beginning of the year. And if you just like in previous years, especially last year, the additional funding was provided based on the crisis that need. And as you stated, yes, we do need to support Ukraine. We do need the funding for during COVID of enhancing health systems around the world does continue. We do need to also look at the food security crisis. But throughout the year, like in previous years, we will look at where we need to step up. And what I would encourage members is for us to have a conversation at the end of the year on terms of where our actually funding currently will be. But right currently, our baseline budget year after year has increased.
No, your baseline budget has to incorporate all of the things that happen in the world. Like, that's what international development is. That's, this is an example of how you're not meeting the needs of the sector, not meeting the needs of people around the world. C-41 is another perfect example, Minister. You were responsible for making sure that public safety and justice understood how humanitarian works, how humanitarian action actually occurs. And in fact, what happened with C-41 is we weaponized, we criminalized international development and humanitarian aid. The sector, everyone in the sector asked for a humanitarian carve-out, and they didn't get that. And when I listen to the experts from safety and from public safety and from finance, it's almost like they've never even heard of what humanitarian aid is. This was deeply flawed legislation. What are you going to do to fix that?
So first of all, when it comes to answer your previous questions regarding stepping up, when it comes to, for example, the climate change fight, we've allocated additional $350 million. That was not also in the budget. My point, Mr.
But
Chair,
I was asking about the total amount and that percentage of ODA, and of course we know that has reduced by 15%. But my question that I'd like you to answer right now, if you don't mind, is C-41.
But you asked multiple questions before, and I was just trying to answer those. I can move to C-41
Let's go to C-41
if you like.
now.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to run out of time. Sorry.
So for C-41, no, this is something that we knew that we needed to change. It was because of the previous legislation that was in place did make it challenges. We had to work with our colleagues to making sure that we had the right balance. But also, I actually commend the committee's work on this, because that's what committee's work is, to make the legislation better. And I look forward to the results on that.
But honestly, it took 18 months for this government to bring forward legislation. It was not what the sector, what anyone in humanitarian that does anything to do with international humanitarian law asked for. It was, in fact, weaponizing and criminalizing international development, which is the opposite thing that the government of Canada should be doing. And you were the minister responsible for making sure that didn't happen.
I would say
and I don't know that you succeeded in that very well, Minister.
Mr. Chair, I would say that through you, when it comes to we did consult a lot of different organizations, and I would say that when it comes to the work that is being done now with the legislation, we look forward to what the results will be. But
don't you think, as the government, you should have brought forward legislation that didn't need so much work done at committee? Wouldn't that have been a better scenario, as if you had brought forward legislation that everybody would have said, yeah, this is exactly what the sector asked for, and thank you for bringing forward this legislation?
The thing is that this is why we have our system in place for a committee, is to make the legislation better, where things need to be changed, so that gives the opportunity.
Often legislation doesn't need this much
Ms.
fixing.
McPherson, I'm afraid you're out of time. So now we proceed to the second round. First, we go with MP Epp. You have 4 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being here. In your opening comments, you made the statement that the department has exceeded its goals. The recent Auditor General report reports otherwise. So $3.5 billion spent over the last few years on a gender lens, feminist focus, billions of dollars of taxpayer funds spent without any recognizable achievements. How do you account for that?
So first of all, some portions of our goals we have exceeded, and in certain measurements we still are working towards that. But also, I would like to emphasize that when it comes to the work that we were doing, because of the different crises, whether it's COVID, also the Ukraine, and the work that we have to do, it is difficult to put a G3 level in. But I'm happy to have our Deputy Minister can explain.
If I could, you said in some areas you have exceeded, but the Auditor General's report refers to 24 of 26 indicators where outcomes were not able to be measured. Are you disagreeing with the Auditor General there?
I am. I had a really good discussion with the Auditor General where we could improve. There are areas that we're actually having a significant impact when it comes to the reporting of the results, where we actually need to focus our improvements. I'm going to have the Deputy Minister provide greater details on that if you'd like.
Very simply, what the Auditor General found was that actually we are able to demonstrate that we have results at the project level. But where we have difficulty is translating across 1,500 individual projects to roll those results up into a single set of indicators.
When did the department discover this? I mean, it's been 5 years since 2017 since this focus was crafted. When was the Auditor General's report that brought it to your attention? Was there no earlier indications?
We've struggled at times with respect to telling the larger results story without having to focus on individual elements such as global health, global food security, and the various other ways in which we provide development assistance, to be able to have a single set of indicators that are small enough to actually be understandable.
How would I explain to my constituents, and all of us around the table have a heart for international development, but these are taxpayer dollars. There's a lot of competition, obviously, for the government on taxpayer dollars, and yet we have an Auditor General report that does not back up that story. So what would you say to the residents of Canada on this AG report?
Well, what I would say very, very simply is that, if you look at individual projects, and we can go through them one by one, we can demonstrate the great results that are being achieved. The difficulty has been in reporting in a succinct, global way across all of those individual projects. But at a project level, we can demonstrate the results clearly.
Minister, if we could, when will the changes be completed on the Auditor General's recommendations?
So first of all, the work has already started when it comes to, for example, the reporting system, having an interim database to be put in place. And the Deputy Minister and the team have already put a plan in place. And we don't have the exact timeline. We can't give you a timeline just yet, but once we have the plan in place, that we'll work with the Auditor General's office on this. I'm happy to report back on it.
Okay. On the farm where I come from, we work from an outcome start and then work backwards to the crops that we're going to grow. My bank manager doesn't accept project reports along the way that don't lead to a positive outcome. I look at the funding splits, 80%, 15%, only 5% for infrastructure. Wouldn't you start with the goals that you're trying to achieve with our international assistance and work backwards from that to the project level, et cetera, rather than announcing funding splits? Or how do you determine those funding splits when you don't have an outcome-based approach?
No, and I do have a farming background. I was raised on a farm, but one of the things that we're focused on is not on the profits. We're focused on feeding people. But having said this, you raise a really good point there. What we need to do, and that's exactly what our Deputy Minister was trying to say, is at the project level we have the results. What we need to focus on is how do we now bring this data together and to be able to demonstrate those results on a larger scale, and that's what we're working on now.
With the questions...
Thank you. Mr. Epp, I'm afraid you're out of time. We will now go to Dr. Fry. You have 4 minutes, Dr. Fry.
Thank you very much, thank you very much, Chair. I thought I had 5 minutes, but there you go. Now, the question, thank you, Minister, for coming. You've been doing an extraordinary amount of work in a very difficult time with conflict and crises of food insecurity, crises of health. You have been really trying to keep up with a lot of things. So I want to thank you for coming and spending some time with us. I want to specifically ask you a question. As you well know, the government has talked about donating half of the $1.4 billion funding to SHRH in areas that have been neglected. And you know those areas of neglect are post-abortion care, comprehensive sexual education, access to safe abortion, and reproductive health and rights. I wanted to know how you are getting that done. What are the challenges you're facing? So that's one question, but because I only have 4 minutes, I'm going to just throw my 3 questions at you. The second one is based on this issue. You know that in Ukraine, and as you mentioned in your presentation, that in fact access to abortion from countries which are receiving Ukrainian immigrants or migrants like Poland and Hungary have very little access to sexual and reproductive health care and rights, even though rape has been announced as being one of the tactics of war, and Ukrainian women are being raped. So how are you dealing with that barrier that you're receiving from those countries? And finally, if you can tell me about vaccine, we need to prepare for the next pandemic, not after it happens, but before it happens. And what are we doing with WHO to deal with access to health and with access to vaccine supplies for a future pandemic? Thank you.
Thank you very much for
Sorry to throw three questions in.
No, it's quite all right. The neglected areas of SRHR is a significant concern to me and our government. In fact, we are currently working on a plan to increase our support to the neglected areas, because even in countries where abortion is illegal, women, it doesn't mean it stops abortion. They still need post support. So these are the areas that we will be increasing. I don't have the plan finalized just yet, but when it does, I look forward to making the announcement. And when it comes to Ukraine, it is absolutely horrible when it comes to the situations of war, the increased violence and rape that has taken place. And when I was in the region, I made sure, talking to our team, to give them a go-ahead to be creative in finding ways to provide support to them, even if a certain country doesn't, whether it's having them find support in a different country, and up to including even if we had to bring them back, have them come to Canada. And I know that the teams were focused on this. When it comes to the vaccine, this is one area that I do want to emphasize, because we have been sadly jumping from crisis to crisis, and we can't forget about the previous crisis that we've had on our hands. So when it comes to the vaccine, I've had very good discussions and monitoring. The reinforcing of a health system, that is continuing. Some of the funding that we have currently put into place, for example, some of the research work that's going into South Africa as a potential vaccine hub. And the goal of this is not just to look at having more vaccine created, but how do we make sure that we have regional hubs where there are good systems in place, so if a pandemic was to come back, we're not dealing with the same issues, where we have a cold supply chain system in place with the people who are trained up to be able to provide those. We have the PPE in place, and more importantly, the vaccine hubs that can actually deliver. So something that we're monitoring very closely and working with our multilateral organizations on this.
Chair, do I have any time left?
You have approximately 13 seconds left, Dr. Fry.
Okay, well, then I was going to ask the minister something about women in peace and security, United Nations 1325, but I'm hoping that sometime along the way he can answer that question. And I wanted to say, Minister, that it is really important for people to note that asking you and international development to fund every single thing means that people don't understand how budgets works. We only have so much money as a country, and we have to divide it in priorities. And thank you for prioritizing so well.
Thank you, Dr. Fry. We will now go to Mr. Bergeron. Mr. Bergeron, you have 2 minutes.
Clearly, I don't know.
Dommage, Monsieur le Président, que Madame Fry ait...
Chair, unfortunately, that Dr. Fry has used these last few seconds for this editorial comment. I understand that we have limited resources, but we have also committed to increasing our contributions to international development of 0.7% of the GDP, and as a result, were it limited, our resources nevertheless have to increase to ensure that we play our part vis-à-vis the global effort to fight poverty. Thank you, Chair. I must say that I would like to echo Mrs. Furson's comments to the extent that I'm as worried about the food crisis that is taking place currently, which is not dropping. And I understand that other budgets are allocated to fighting this food crisis. But to see that, despite everything, we are reducing our contribution does worry me. Some amounts have been reduced to fight in terms of the fight against climate change in developing countries. And that's $433.2 million that have been gradually cut back will be gradually cut back by 2025-26. And this despite the considerable impacts that we've seen. And we Minister, we spoke about it. We saw these impacts in Pakistan over the last few months. Is this the right action to take in light of the fact that very frequently developing countries are proportionately greater impacted by climate change compared to developed countries?
Mr. Chair, climate change is one of the existential crises that we have. This is one of the reasons why the Prime Minister authorized a doubling of our climate adaptation funding to $5.3 billion. So there are certain programs that are currently taking place. Some might be expiring. But let's not also forget, just most recently, our government just announced $350 million for biodiversity as well. So we are playing our role. We're also encouraging others to play their part. Well, one of the things I'm happy to say that working closely with the Minister of the Environment is how do we look at the work that we do in the environment, but also at the same time tackle some of the food security crisis. So in some places what we're doing is making sure that when we're looking at climate adaptation or biodiversity, how at the same time do we protect agricultural fields? That also impacts on food security. So some good work is taking place. More importantly, on what I'm actually very impressed with, there are a lot of other nations are stepping up to come up with their own plans. So rather than us telling them what needs to be done, nations are coming up with their own plans. I will be going to the African Union to discuss with them the national plans that they're putting forward, and then because Canada can't do it all, obviously, but we are looking at where we can have key areas of focus. And when it comes to food security, some of it's also going to be, we have to also think about even things like fertilizer. So we're taking a multifaceted approach from looking at the climate work and trying to link at the food security, trying to bring things together so that we can maximize our support. So not look at one fund, but look at how we're doing food security here and kind of layer on the funding support so we can even have a bigger impact on the ground.
Thank you, Minister. We now go to MP McPherson. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you again, Minister. Minister, I want to ask you a couple questions about FinDev, if I could. How is FinDev, how do you determine where the funds go within FinDev? How do we know what the end use results of FinDev are? And where is that information located so people can access it like parliamentarians?
Can you take that question? He will explain in far greater detail than I can.
Sure. So FinDev is, as you know...
I'm only going to give you about 30 seconds. Just so you
know. Subsidiary of EDC, reports annually through the EDC. It's every year it has a strategic plan that it identifies its top priorities. Right now it functions largely in the Americas and in sub-Saharan Africa.
So $1.3 billion goes to FinDev or has gone to FinDev since 2018. Can you tell me if we know if there's been any results? Because from my understanding is the money goes out the door and we have very little information that comes back on what's been achieved.
Maybe, I don't know, Drew, if I don't have the statistics in front of me right now, but only a small portion.
Provide those statistics to this committee in writing, please.
Yes, in terms of the number, for example, of that $1.3 billion that you've noted.
And what's been achieved?
Absolutely, but not very much of it has actually been loaned out yet.
Wait for people to answer.
I feel like that it is $1.3 billion that's gone out. Is that not accurate?
No.
Okay.
No.
I'd love to get that information.
Allocated to FinDev.
Okay, thank you. Minister, the Africa strategy. We've heard about it. Has it been downgraded to an African framework now?
Sorry, what do you mean by Africa strategy?
My understanding is that the government was engaging in the creation of an Africa strategy. And at this point, we've been informed that it's been downgraded to an African framework. I'd like some clarification on if that has happened and why.
So first of all, I wasn't working on an Africa strategy. We've been focused on, this is an area of focus that we had for a very long time.
Okay.
I know that when it comes to the work that we do, this is an area that we have actually increased and integrated our work. So for example, so
there's no Africa strategy being created by the government of Canada?
No, so there's I think what you're talking about, but when in terms of the work that is being done is a little bit more. I won't be able to explain it here in the short period that we have. But
could you provide a written explanation?
Ms. McPherson,
I'd probably take you
I'm
offline
afraid you're out of time. Thank you, Ms. McPherson. We now go to Mr. Jennis. Mr. Jennis, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Maybe the Africa strategy was in an email somewhere. Minister, I think we're having some challenges around seeing results, to be blunt about it. The Auditor General says that you're not measuring results when it comes to improving the lives of women and girls. C-41 is deeply flawed. The budget reverses various aid commitments. We have the whole issues of emails checked during a crisis, and that's beyond many of the other issues we've had at Department of Defense. So I think the challenge from this committee would be to you is we want to see results. We want to see outcomes. We don't just want to see good intentions. We want to see positive results. I want to zero in first on a follow-up to my colleagues' questions on the Auditor General. It's not clear to me if you fully accept and agree with the conclusions of the Auditor General in what was a very damning report. So I want to hear from you, the Minister. Do you accept and fully agree with the conclusions of the Auditor General?
Not only we accept all the recommendations, in fact, I had direct discussions with the Auditor General.
It's great you had discussion. It's just a yes would be wonderful. Yes. Okay, fantastic. And so does that mean you're committed to actually measuring outcomes going forward and revising the things you're measuring? Because right now you're measuring indicators, but not outcomes at an overall level. Are you committed to fully measuring outcomes going forward?
Yes, we are.
Okay. And when do you think that change will be fully implemented?
The plan is being put together right now. We had a good briefing on it. The work has already started on this.
But at what point will the Auditor General be able to come back and say, here's a check mark, it's done?
In fact, actually, we'll be working with the Auditor Generals in terms of the plan that we have to making sure that it actually meets their expectations. And so there's no mistaken interpretation on the recommendation.
But just what's the timeline, though?
I can't give you a timeline just yet because we're working on the plan.
Okay. Generally, if you're making a plan, you're trying to achieve results. You have a timeline. We're gonna try to achieve it by this point. So as that becomes available,
I would say it's not only just as soon as possible, but what we want to do is a phase plan. It's not going to wait till a longer term. We want to look at short term, medium, and long term objectives.
Sure, but the bottom line is the structure you have is with great fanfare, talks about improving the lives of women and girls, but it's not actually measuring outcomes in terms of improvements to the lives of women and girls. And I think it's not too much to ask to say what's the timeline for when we'll start measuring outcomes. It'll take a while to realize those outcomes in various ways, of course, but that's what we're suggesting, I think. I wanted to ask a follow-up question about the issue of the illegal documents as well. I'd like to know when you first found out about that. You said you weren't checking your emails at the time. At what point in time did you find out that your chief of staff had sent a template, that illegal documents were issued, and so forth? When did you first become aware of these facts?
Yes, Ms. Vandenbelt, you
Once
have a
again,
point of order?
I believe that this line of questioning is not on the main estimates.
I think on that point, I think it relates to his competence and work as minister. And this is the last question on this. When did you become aware of it, Minister?
So, Mr. Chair, if I need to be able to explain this in the full context, if you'd allow me.
So when did you first become aware of it, Minister?
Minister, please do proceed, Minister.
I'll tell you what, you answer the question, and then you can have the rest of the time to talk about whatever you want.
I actually would prefer to provide the full context, so there's a better...
But just first, because I'm almost out of time, when did you first become aware of this?
Well, you asked another question, so I just want to make sure that I can answer it properly. So I want to make sure that you're not going to keep interrupting me, so I can give the full context rather than giving you the opportunity so you can get a soundbite out of it.
Proceed.
Minister, if we could now ask you to respond.
So when it made aware of an issue with the facilitation letters, when the emergency was taking place, it was identified the facilitation letters were required. Once that was done, I knew that there's a process taking place on facilitation letters. However, when an issue with facilitation letters and with Senator McFedrin, I only realized this, I think, I think it was in the news most recently.
You only found out about it through media reports.
I'm afraid you're out
That's
of
what you
time.
said. Yes, the minister said yes. Is that right? You only found out through media reports.
You're out of time.
Thank you, Minister.
Dennis,
That's striking. Thanks.
So we will now go to the last question from the minister. We go to MP Vandenbelt. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for being here, Minister. I'd like to go back to some of the lines of questioning from earlier from some of the opposition members with that claim that ODA has been cut. In fact, in your answer, you explained it's gone up. In fact, I believe 49% since 2015. And then, it was mentioned that when something happens like Ukraine or COVID, that is an exceptional thing, a crisis in the world, there then is an exceptional off-cycle ask, and then that is funded. Does this mean that in the future we would still be able to do these exceptional off-cycle asks if there are emergencies like those that continue? So in essence, nothing has changed other than the fact that we keep on increasing ODA to 2030?
Absolutely. In fact, as I explained in previous years, because emergencies do pop up, we need to respond. And this is something that, regrettably, a pattern that we're going to have to continue to repeat. And what the numbers that we're talking about are analyzed at the end of the year, and we're starting out a budget at the beginning of the year. And the baseline budget has systematically increased, and even in this budget, we're actually asking for over $100 million from the previous baseline budget as well. And what I would encourage members to do is to look at where the line has been going. And then at the same time, we do need to step up when crises do come up, which we have, whether it's Ukraine. Sadly, it was COVID. It might be something else. And I remind people we had to do a $250 million budget request. And this does not include some of the other challenges that we have had. But our government is absolutely committed to increasing our development assistance. We have shown the pattern and the graphs. I can show members on this. But I also want to just take a point here is the work that's also done. I take the opportunity to visit as many projects. We do have a lot of work to do when it comes to putting all that information together. But project by project, and I encourage this committee, if they ever have an opportunity to go visit those projects, not only our people in global affairs on the ground are doing absolutely amazing work, but also our partners as well. And to see the impact that you're having. I can just give you one example. Since the Sudan crisis here, when I was visiting South Sudan, thinking that that's an area I needed to visit because the peace agreement was expiring, I went into one place where you had a women entrepreneurship program on farming. They were growing things that they weren't able to grow before. And we said, it's a small little area. We're originally from a small village. They're able to feed their village, and the excess food they're able to sell, right? And that excess food is the difference between sometimes their children getting the medical support or being able to go to school, right? And this is just one micro example of having an impact on people's lives. Or medical clinics in the slums in Bangladesh. And I can go, the list goes on. So I encourage members to kind of go visit some of those projects.
And on results, because there was a question about the Auditor General's report earlier, and I don't want people to get the wrong impression. I think we all know that certainly our feminist international assistance policy is having real results on the ground. But what the Auditor General was saying is we're not capturing that information and aggregating it and telling our story properly. So if you could maybe clarify that as well.
That's the thing. We have the results. We have to get better at being able to pull it together. And so that once we aggregate it, we can make even better decisions on this. And I also just want to emphasize on the feminist approach, one of the key things that I'm seeing, and I want the research to kind of look at demonstrating this, is when people ask, why do we have feminist assistance policy? Not only it's the right thing to do, and we need to send a very strong message, but if you want to achieve your results faster, you take the feminist approach. This is why Germany has now launched their own. Other nations, even though they haven't launched their policies, are taking our example as well, because it's having an impact. Research has shown that if you give funding support to women in certain areas, they will have a much bigger impact than traditionally if it was given to men.
And didn't you just make a big announcement on women voice and leadership? Okay.
MP Vandenbelt, I'm afraid you're out of time. So it now being past noon, I will thank the minister for having once again appeared before our committee. Of course, this was for members to ask you questions about the main estimates for 2023 and 24. But of course, you answered a host of disparate and different types of questions as well. So we're very grateful. We will now provide you, Minister, a few minutes to depart. And I will suspend for 2 minutes just to allow for the officials to assume their positions. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, we don't hear you. Sorry, we don't hear anything. Yeah, so we'll just verify something. I saw that you were speaking, but we could not hear you. Nope. I will verify with the IT consultant. Mr. Chair, could you speak just to...
you ever so much for that, Madam Clerk. So we will now proceed to the second part of today's session, which is questions for officials on the main estimates for 2023, 2024. Now, I'm advised that the officials will be remaining with us till 12:45. So the first question is for Mr. Jennis. Mr. Jennis, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to follow up with the officials on Bill C-41. I know it's not. I know it's a public safety or justice lead, not you guys directly, but I'm hoping you're part of the process, and obviously you deal with international development organizations, and you'll be providing advice on the implementation of aspects of this. It's working its way through the Process Justice Committee. There's a lot of concerns about how it works. I wonder if you could tell us which parts of the world right now development organizations would need to make applications for, other than Afghanistan. There's been a lot of discussion about Afghanistan, but the bill would apply in other places. So where would you advise international development organizations they need to make an application other than Afghanistan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you're suggesting that if there's another entity listed in the criminal code and operating in a certain country, where would Canadian organizations have to make an application?
The bill doesn't just apply to listed entities. Mm-hmm. I think you know that, right?
Yeah.
It applies to any terrorist organization. So, and the problem is development organizations are expected to know where they need to apply and where they don't, depending on what control looks like and what might be determined as a terrorist organization, even if it's not a listed entity. So I guess I'm looking for what advice you would give to them if this bill passes in its current form. What are the places they would need to make applications regarding prior to operating?
I think until the law is in place, I'm not in a position to really make that judgment. We have a very specific situation in Afghanistan with a listed entity that's become a barrier to humanitarian development organizations working there. In the context of humanitarian organizations, which I work with most closely, we've made arrangements so that they can operate there in the current situation.
Right. To your original comment, though, that you're not in a position to answer the question, I think you are, and you should be, because we're deciding as legislators how to treat this bill. And I think it's not some abstract hypothetical. It's a question of if this bill, as it's written by your government, were law today, and a humanitarian or other development organizations were saying, where is it that we need to apply? With whom, if we're dealing with them, should we make an application? You're going to need to be able to answer that question, or at least they're going to need to be able to answer that question in order to avoid prosecution. So what are those places?
As I said, Mr. Chair, I'm not currently in a position to answer that question because the law is not on the books.
But why does it matter if the law is not on the books?
Because that is the moment at which an organization would have to make an application.
I know, but let's say the bill were law. Like, let's say we agree to pass the bill really fast. Let's say hypothetically we just said unanimous consent, House, Senate, it's done tomorrow. Where would people have to apply? For what regions?
Again, Mr. Chair, until the law is on the books. So if the law is on the book as it's currently amended, organizations will be able to come forward to make an application, and at that point, the government will be able to provide them with advice. So work is ongoing on that, but I'm not in a position to identify specific countries at this time.
Okay, I don't really think that's a reasonable answer, respectfully. I mean, clearly you've given it, and you're not going to move past it. But the reality is organizations have to make these decisions about whether or not to make an application. And we as legislators have to make decisions about where this bill would and would not apply, as written. And so for you to say, well, we won't know until the bill becomes law where it would apply, it puts us in a bit of an impossible situation in terms of deciding whether or not the bill, as it's written, works well or not. Also on C-41, do you plan to provide advice to organizations prior to making an application? Let's say someone comes to you and says, we would like to know if we need to apply in order to operate in a particular place. Do we need to, or dealing with a particular organization? Would you answer those questions?
Mr. Chair, point of order. You're on mute, Chair.
Yes, Mr. Sarai?
I'm just curious how this has anything to do with the main estimates, Bill C-41. And
It's about
proposed
international
and how-
development.
How it would be implemented, and asking our officials on something that's presumptuous and it has not been cleared, they would have no answer. It's nothing to do with what we're here for today.
Yes, if I could ask all the members to keep their questions within scope and on the main estimates. Mr. Jennis, I did stop the clock. The floor is yours.
Yeah, this is obviously in scope. Such a ridiculous objection. It's not even worth really dignifying with a response. This is about the work of the International Development Department and their advice to organizations. So, if you could just proceed to answer the question, would you provide that advice to organizations in advance of an application?
Mr. Chair, as you said at the outset of your question, this is really the scope of public safety and justice. So they will be the ones operating the regime, however it looks once the law is passed. So
right, but to put a fine point on it, folks will be coming to you for advice, right? You're the folks responsible for international development. You deal with humanitarian organizations. They will come to you and say, "Do we need to make an application in this particular case?"
Mr. Jennis, I'm afraid you're out of time.
And that advice
so
will be based
if
on
I could ask the
Chair, how much time was I supposed to have?
You're over. You were supposed to have 5 minutes. So if I could ask the official to respond very, very briefly, please.
Just to say, if an organization comes to us when the bill is law, we would be working in consultation with public safety and justice to provide advice to that organization. It's not solely the responsibility of global affairs.
Thank you. We now go to MP Bendayan. You have 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. I would like to speak to our Feminist Assistance Program, the Feminist International Assistance Program, and I'd like to hear you speak about the tangible results that you're able to see on the ground. Perhaps you could cite some examples to clarify to those Canadians who are listening to us what it is that we're currently undertaking and where exactly. I'd like to note that there is some $200 million that has been invested in a program called Women's Voice and Leadership. Could we hear you speak about the work that has been carried out under these two programs?
Merci.
Thank you. I didn't hear you mention the first program, the THEA.
Within a policy framework of the Feminist International Assistance Policy for the last 5 years. And within that, we have really been looking at how can we address some of the underlying issues that are at the core of some of the development challenges. And so one of the signature initiatives within this is Women's Voice and Leadership. Equally with that, we have funding to the Equality Fund. What these have in common is a commitment to try and give resources directly to those organizations, to those people working locally in their communities. And that is based on the recognition that they are best placed to know what the needs of their communities are and to be able to make decisions that will benefit those communities. And so as part of that work, we've really had a chance to see what that impact is. For instance, giving relatively small amount of resources to organizations, women's rights organizations in countries, they've been able to directly advocate for laws, for instance, civil society laws that ensure that they have, first of all, rights in place, that they're able to address issues around human rights, that they are able to have access to property, for instance, to titles. And every day they are working in many countries in sub-Saharan Africa and globally to advocate for their needs as individual women and girls, but also for their communities. And it's the kind of work that is around empowering them and underlying all of this is that they are changing the dynamics in their country and very much leading the change. Je comprends qu'on n'a peut-être pas le temps là, pour aller dans les détails.
I understand that we may not have enough time to address the details right now, but perhaps could you forward to the committee a list of the organizations that are receiving funding from the federal government in order to carry out this work? of advocacy and awareness raising and activism to guarantee the rights of women. You mentioned some areas of Africa and elsewhere. Perhaps you could send us some examples in writing. Certainly, it's always possible to cite examples. But I would say is that a vast majority of our projects are really focused on the issues of equity and to ensure that support is directly delivered to women and girls is within all of our priorities. I'm a bit hesitant because we have more than 1,500 projects underway. That's many projects. We're trying to promote these projects and to share the information. So a lot of this is available on our website. But certainly I could cite some examples of projects. If time permits, I would be happy to share them with you. Thank you. If time allows, I would like to listen to you a bit again. That's 1,500 projects, if I've heard you correctly. And that is major, therefore, for us that we obtain this information. So if you could please send us that information, I'd like to encourage you to do so. So perhaps I'll give you a bit of time to send us these examples. But I'm also trying to understand what it is we're doing in Uganda, because there is a great deal of movement taking place in bills. The legislation that was passed to limit the rights of the LGBTQ community there. So perhaps you could describe to us how Canada is responding to that.
In Uganda is very concerning to us. We have many of our Canadian partners that have been working with people on the ground to help them as they are facing a backlash on their rights and restrictive laws. And so what we are doing now is working in tandem with them to see how we can still provide support. But this is development working in context with other aspects of our foreign policy. So for instance, ensuring that our advocacy on the ground through our embassies, through our missions abroad, also supports that work. And to ensure that those people that are being targeted, we can provide the necessary support because of the belief in the support for civil society and the importance of reinforcing the rights of all persons.
Thank you. We now go to MP Bergeron for 5 minutes. MP Bergeron, the floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to respond to Ms. Vandenbeld's comment. I think that much can be stated about the numbers, but I believe that one of the wishes expressed by the NGOs in charge of international cooperation is that the government does not simply use the excuse of there having been a crisis to lower its contributions, but on the contrary, to increase this. However, despite this concern that has been expressed, there was mention of the fact that there's a crisis, which, by the way, is not over yet, as our colleague has indicated. The health crisis is not over. The food crisis is not over, nor is the crisis of climate change over. And there's been mention of the so-called end of these crises. And it is being used as an excuse to reducing contributions to international development aid. And I just want to state that I find it unfortunate that we have decided to make that decision. It is a political decision that the government has taken and that it has to take ownership of. And that is it. Now, I'd like to put the following question to our witness. First of all, thank you for joining us. Earlier, I didn't have an opportunity to thank you. And I know that no doubt you'd have many as important things to take care of, but you took the time to come here, and that's greatly appreciated. Ms. McPherson asked a question to the minister regarding the strategies in place, and she seemed rather surprised about the question, the issues. She didn't quite know what he didn't quite know what Ms. McPherson was referring to. And I have an article from the Hill Times here of December 2022, where it reminds us of the Parliamentary Secretary of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, our colleague Robert Oliphant, had stated in July that he believed and hoped that he would be able to submit the strategy to Cabinet prior to December 2022. However, this is an article of December 7th, and at that time, apparently, this still had not been done. We are now in April 2023. So where are we at with the development of this African strategy at the government?
Rob really is writing it himself.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would say that we would have to get back to you in terms of the update on the, I think it's the Africa Economic Strategy, I believe. And certainly what I would say from the context of international development, Sub-Saharan Africa is a priority of the government with the Feminist International Assistance Policy. Priority given to our programming in Sub-Saharan Africa. And that really is, I think, a foundational element of our international assistance. Having said that, the relationship between trade and development and the importance of economic development is something that is well understood within the international development context. And linkages between trade and development in the context of an Africa economic strategy will be important, and I would imagine will be fleshed out through the course of that strategy.
Donc, je comprends que vous allez nous revenir avec des informations par écrit.
So that I understand that you'll be providing us with written information following this?
With an update on where that strategy is.
Merci infiniment.
Thank you very much. We've also observed that public assistance from Canada internationally is mainly focused on a number of countries. In 2021, 2022, these countries were Ethiopia, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Ukraine, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Nigeria. So if in the case of Afghanistan and Ukraine, we well understand the reasons why the government has made these a priority, but in some cases, the response is not quite as obvious, specifically when it comes to Ethiopia, for instance, where for months the Ethiopian government waged a dirty war against Tigray, and Ethiopia is the main beneficiary of Canada International Development Assistance. My question is this: why Ethiopia, Bangladesh, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Nigeria to the detriment of other countries with whom, for instance, we have more relations on a cultural, ties culturally as well, for example, such as Haiti? Thank you for that question.
And just distinguish between humanitarian assistance and development assistance. And in the list of countries that you cited, we have very large investments predominantly in humanitarian assistance. Ukraine is obviously much broader than that. And so humanitarian assistance is always neutral, it's always impartial. It operates in contexts, as you said, that are very difficult to stomach at times, with actors that are very difficult to stomach. But the underlying principle of it is that we will deliver life-saving assistance to people in need. And so that is why you see elevated levels of assistance in Afghanistan, in Ethiopia, in the DRC, as well as some of the other countries you mentioned.
Je comprends très bien ce que vous me dites, mais...
Thank you, Mr. Bergeron. I'm afraid you're considerably over time. Thank you. So we next go to MP McPherson. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here and sharing your expertise with us today, witnesses. I just wanted to respond very quickly to what you had said, Mr. Smith, about trade being an important part. I would suggest that our government has promoted trade over development, over diplomacy, over peacekeeping. And frankly, when you have trade without development, without diplomacy, without peacekeeping, it is not trade, it is exploitation. And so I would flag that for the group. When I was within the sector, I was actually sitting on the TAFE task force, which was the task force on implementing effectiveness at Global Affairs Canada. Much of the concerns that we raised within that task force have not been addressed by Global Affairs that are still outstanding. And one of them is the time it takes for a proposal to go from proposal to completion. And I'm going to raise an issue right now for the Small and Medium Fund. So right now we have the Small and Medium Fund, which was asked for proposals in September 2021. 18 organizations were asked to complete a full proposal in 2022, May 2022, and they have still not received a result. So basically we have a situation where 18 proposals cannot be evaluated by Global Affairs Canada in a year. Which is appalling, of course, especially because of the impact, I'm sure you all know, that it has on organizations. Now, my understanding is that it takes up to 17 different sign-offs for a proposal to be approved. So 2 questions. First of all, is this acceptable? Does this meet the standards that Global Affairs Canada has in terms of timeframes? And also, if this is the case, how on earth can we expect that C-41 would work in a humanitarian crisis when we require Global Affairs to be able to respond?
Thank you, Chair, for the question. I'm really pleased to be able to kind of respond to it. To answer directly, no, it's not acceptable, and we recognize it. But we're working very hard at it. We have a huge volume of grants and contributions. We know that our systems are cumbersome. We have multiple old systems that don't fit well together. This simply doesn't meet our current but also our future business needs. And when I say our, I mean ourselves, but also our partners. We have aging technology, and we know that there's a need to modernize how we do our work. So all of these are factors that have influenced our commitment to move forward with a transformation of grants contributions. This was something that we identified early with the Auditor General's team when they were doing their work, and we know that our information management systems are simply not up to task.
Sorry to interrupt, ma'am, and thank you very much for that. But can I ask, are you understaffed? Is the Global Affairs Canada an understaffed department within this government?
With regard to the issues that you raised, there are multiple factors that influence what is affecting, for instance, our ability to look at projects that we received, capabilities of our staff, but also just some of our systems that we're looking at. So the grants and contributions will look at that whole piece, not just one part of it. There's a fundamental IT part of it. And what we will be doing is rethinking our business processes, looking at where we actually need to streamline, use new technologies, for instance, artificial intelligence, where let's say something is no longer needing to have somebody doing a paper form, and hopefully lighten the burden for our partners. What I really like about this process is that our partners are in the tent and involved with us. You mentioned TAFE. That's now being rolled in as a committee that's part of a partner forum within the grants contributions.
And I'm going to interrupt. Sorry, I'm just so short on time. But unfortunately, TAFE, I sat on the TAFE in 2017, and those things were identified then. It feels very much like nothing has changed since then. And I don't doubt very much that the staff at Global Affairs work very, very hard, and I know that firsthand. But I do wonder why nothing has changed in the 5 years since then. And I guess one of my questions for you is, the Canadian International Development Agency was brought into DFAD and then Global Affairs Canada. Do you believe that was the right decision to make? Do you think that Canada's development has gotten better now that we no longer have a Canadian International Development Agency?
So on the first part of your question, the Grants and Contributions Transformation Project just got underway this year. I understand that these are issues that have been identified for some time. What I can say is that we have a clear commitment to move forward now, rolling up all those issues, and with a plan that over the next 5 years, we will be looking at addressing all those issues that you addressed. I don't have an opinion on the latter part of the
Very quickly
question.
then, could you also provide the committee written information about the breakdown of development dollars that go to multilateral, bilateral, and Canadian organizations, please? Thank you.
Thank you very much, MP McPherson. We next go to MP Epp. MP Epp, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the officials for being here. I'm going to continue questioning from my colleague, again, specifically on information systems, which was flagged by the Auditor General, and you've acknowledged that. There were delays. 9 projects had partial information, 1 had none of the 60 projects reviewed. So I'm going to ask you to sharpen your answer a little bit. Is this an information system? For my colleague, I understand that these issues existed 5 years ago. Is it a staffing? Is it a COVID? Is it a work location? When it's flagged by the Auditor General in a report, it gets my attention anyway. So I'm going to ask you to respond.
Thank you, Chair, for the question. So when the Auditor General's team met with us, we identified proactively with that team that we were looking to address information management challenges. We proactively raised the issue. On the request of information from the Auditor General's team, we recognized that there were delays in getting them the information that they wanted, but I can say that all the information that was requested was submitted to that team, albeit not within the initial first. We were given 5 days to submit the information. We acknowledge we weren't able to do that within the 5 days that we were given to provide it, but did eventually.
So all 60 projects were reported to the AG, just not within the 5 days, is that correct?
There was one project that related to Ukraine, for which the documents were in Ukraine, and therefore we were not able to provide the information to that one project.
Okay, so the Auditor General's conclusions regarding not having outcome-based reporting available, outcomes available, is that tied to your information system shortfalls, or is that more of a process, an internal process shortfall?
It is a separate area. We look at our results reporting on multiple levels. So we have projects that have fulsome results frameworks. They have particular indicators that look at activities. But then for each project, we are actually able to look at the actual outcomes of that project. The challenge, as the Deputy Minister mentioned before, is being able to aggregate some of those. But I can say that for individual projects, we are able to look at those outcomes. We do have, on sectoral level, some indicators that help us to describe the changes over time, and these are linked to our departmental reporting. The challenge that we are trying to do is to link the project level results and do a better telling of the story as we roll it up, and that's something that's work in progress.
I'm going to ask you or to whomever to comment perhaps on the direction of planning. And so 2017, the 5-year three commitments were made in 2017 for 3 areas of spending. 15% of the spending, the target toward gender targeted, 80% toward gender integrated, and then 5% for infrastructure. So without the lack of outcomes as driving those spending splits and with the information systems, can you comment on whether the direction of thought process, or am I getting this all wrong, that the targeted, the splits, the 15, the 80, and the 5, weren't the drivers of the projects? Were they the outcome of projects, the targets? Do you understand my question? Is it going in this direction and we didn't have outcomes, or do we start with our goals and work backwards to what money we spent? I note that the Auditor General, only 2 of the 3 pillars, the spending was met. I'm not saying we spend money for spending money's sake, but we're after outcomes here.
I'd be happy to respond to that, Mr. Chair. So what I would say is that the targets that are included in the policy are about allocation. So it's allocating the resources to certain types of programming, as you note, the gender targeted, the gender integrated. I have to say the 5% for infrastructure I'm not aware of, so that there may be just some confusion there. But in terms of allocating resources, that would drive the project choices that we're making. So the projects that my colleague has been highlighting in terms of the outcomes and result statements that are developed, they're framed around the allocation choices we're making. So in answer to your question, the allocation of resources to specific kinds of gender equality programming determines the broad nature of the projects that are ultimately implemented.
The Minister in his remarks earlier talked about potentially, hopefully, using the Auditor General's report to get to better decision-making, et cetera. And I note, and my colleague, Mr. Bergeron, touched on this, where a lot of the spending has occurred historically outside of the surprises, if we want to call that, with Ukraine. We've been in Ethiopia a long time. My own history goes back to the beginnings of that. We're after outcomes. Can you comment on why, Ethiopia, I understand Afghanistan, but why have we been so long in Ethiopia seemingly with not, are there results to show for that?
I would say that there are countries in which we can achieve better results in shorter periods. There are countries where the results that we achieve are focused more on crisis response, humanitarian assistance. So, the question of are we achieving results, I mean, it really does depend on the nature of the investments we're making. And in a country like Ethiopia, over a period of decades, there would be results achieved in different ways under different contexts. So, we've seen Ethiopia undergo some significant humanitarian and conflict issues, and we would achieve results in that context as we would have done previously with longer-term development investments.
Thank you. If I could get one more question in.
No, I'm afraid you can't, Mr.
I
Epp.
didn't
You're
think so.
considerably over time. And for the last question, we will now go to MP Sarai. You have 5 minutes, and the floor is yours, MP Sarai.
Thank you, Chair. As we've noticed, climate change is a big factor in the world. How is Canada helping countries that are facing natural disasters, suffering severe impacts of climate change? Can you tell us what Canada is doing in order to fight climate change in respect to the work they do at Global Affairs?
Sure. Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Chair. So the government in 2021 renewed its commitment to climate finance, doubling it from $2.65 to $5.3 billion. We're now in year 3 of those investments. The first round of climate finance from 2012 to 2020 resulted in significant mitigation, removing 228 megatons of greenhouse gases, or offsetting, I should say. And in our current portfolio, we are focused, 60% of the portfolio is focused on climate mitigation, 40% is focused on climate adaptation. And we're delivering that funding, which is a combination of loans and grants. We're delivering it through large multilateral investments. So a coal transition piece of work we're doing with the Climate Investment Fund at the World Bank. But we're also working with smaller organizations to deliver adaptation outcomes to help small farmers, small communities adapt to climate change. And we work with organizations, both Canadian and international NGOs, as well as I said, UN institutions and the international financial institutions.
Thank you. And then can you share with the committee the progress to deliver on that Canada's commitment to help developing countries transition from low carbon economies to build resilience and effects of climate change, with the effects of climate change?
Certainly. One of the initiatives we're involved in, so I did mention the coal transition initiative that we invested $1 billion in with the World Bank. We're also working with other members of the G7 on just energy transition partnership, so working with countries like South Africa, Indonesia, to help them transition from coal burning to a greener future.
And then how's Canada's climate financing supporting women and girls, Indigenous people, and the poorest and the most vulnerable?
So one of the targets I did not mention when I talked about the mitigation adaptation split is that 80% of our work in the climate finance portfolio targets gender equality. So we have already exceeded that target at year 3 of the new 5-year investment. And so we continue to, that informs all our investments. That's something we consider up front. And it plays out in terms of how we work with large institutional investments. So we're driving the gender equality investment lens perspective with some of the larger institutions we deal with. And then we also work with smaller organizations who either bring that perspective or work with a range of partners that can deliver these results on the ground.
And transitioning just to a different point, how are Canada's global aid distributed continentally to Africa versus Asia, Polynesian countries, Eastern Europe, etc.?
Thank you. I'm going to actually answer a question that's related to that was asked earlier that I didn't get a chance to answer to, which is about 25% of our international assistance is delivered by the multilateral channel. About 75%, well, not about, 75% is delivered bilaterally. And then there was a question on Canadian organizations, and I believe 25% of our overall envelope goes to Canadian organizations. Mr. Chair, I'd have to get back to you on the breakdown. I mean, I should say this, that we do have a target that 50% of our international assistance should be delivered in sub-Saharan Africa. But as for how the rest of the world breaks down, I'd have to return to you.
There used to be a program under CEDA, the agency, a long time ago, in terms of adopting like a village. You could almost adopt a village. People from the continent, from Canada, would raise a certain percentage of the funds, and sometimes the World Bank, sometimes others, and then CEDA would put the other half, so it would like almost double up, kind of like a donor policy. Is there any such program that already exists or is in the works anywhere in the world that Global Affairs is running?
Thank you for the question, Chair. We are always evolving the projects that we do. And we do that both in response to the countries that we're working with, making sure that we're responding to their needs and what they're looking for, but also, particularly in the cases where we work with Canadian partners, the ideas they have and the relationships they have with their counterparts in developing countries. So we don't have a project exactly like that, but there are initiatives that involve, for instance, bringing of Canadian expertise. Maybe I'll link to a question that was asked earlier. There's a Partnering for Climate initiative that is currently underway, and we did a call for proposals that involves Canadian Indigenous organizations. The idea is for them to be able to share their knowledge and expertise and then partner with those communities in countries so that there can be shared learning. This is part of those kind of evolving projects that maybe something like that didn't exist before, but is very much responsive to the issues that those countries and those communities have identified.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Sarai. It now being 12:45, I'm afraid that will conclude our session of questions with officials. Allow me at this opportunity to thank Peter McDougall, Anik Goulet, Patricia Pina, Annie Boyer, and Andrew Smith for having been with us and for answering all the questions posed by the members. I'll remind the members that our next study on Thursday, May 4th, will be an appearance by Minister Melanie Joly. Now, we will suspend briefly to allow our witnesses to depart, and we will continue with the last portion of our meeting, which will be in cameras. Members who are attending via Zoom, please use the other hyperlink and connection information that was sent by the clerk. And we will resume in camera in a few minutes. Thank you.
you.